Right off the bat, I have to say, no guest this week. Things didn't work out. I had someone lined up, but we couldn't get the interview rolling. So, you're stuck with me today. Again, 2 weeks in a row. Sorry about that. I'm going to try to line things up so I have a guest for this next week. So we'll see what happens there, but I need to get that out of the way because I wanted to have a rotating schedule of alternating 1 week on with a guest, 1 week off, and do that. But let's talk about some stuff. Quick thoughts and the epilogue today are more rants than anything. I'm pretty off topic as to what the essay is about. But I just picked up my pieces from Street Legal yesterday. So I had a body of work in there that was just exploring the theme of MK Ultra in kind of like a fun and cheeky but serious way, which I don't think I'm going to get into all the details about. But I mean, on my art social media, the exhibition is there and the artist statement is there for people to read. But anyway, it's a body of work that I mean, it's only 9 pieces, but I had the idea for it many years ago and finally got an opportunity to exhibit it, and I really felt like with this specific work, the whole point was to exhibit it like it was created for that specific purpose, to be part of a whole. It couldn't exist, most of these pieces, like 8 out of 9 of these pieces can't really exist on their own without being part of a whole. They just don't make as much sense, the context isn't there, and part of that is the concept that they're not saleable by themselves. Without context, I feel it'd be really difficult because the majority of them are portraits, for one thing. So 7 out of 9 of the pieces are portraits, and only 3 of them are probably someone who's recognizable to the average person. And even then, the average person, there needs to be a certain amount of context and history with them, and it'd be a certain age range probably. Because one is Charlie Manson, which I'm sure many people would be able to pick up on pretty quick. Then Nicki Minaj, I feel like there'd be a lot of people that would recognize, and on the other end of that, Anna Nicole Smith, I feel like a different generation, a lot of them will recognize her, especially with the clown makeup on and stuff like that. But anyway, the rest of the portraits even are like of government officials or victims of MK Ultra or doctors that were somehow involved, and they're pretty anonymous people. However, then there is Harry S. Truman, and that portrait, I don't think a lot of people would recognize. That would be the 4th, probably most recognizable one, and I think it's a pretty big gap between 4th and 3rd most recognizable. But without the context of the exhibition, it just doesn't really make sense. I think I would have a very hard time selling them, and to be honest, the Charles Manson one is also my favorite visually and aesthetically, and I think it was handled with the most patience because it was the very last one I did, so I knew how much time I had left. And like none of them were created in a space where I had a lot of time. I put myself in a position where I had to make them fairly quickly. So even though the other ones, I still like them, they're not my best work that I could have done at the time. I could have done better if I gave myself an opportunity to do better, which I didn't because I procrastinated. So and 2 of them are just completely like unsaleable. They're not portraits. They're not abstract. I don't know how to explain what they are. One of them is kind of a really loose, like depiction of a building, which was Raven Scrag, and the other one is like American flag bed sheets with a message on it that someone had said, like a quote. Anyway, I just don't feel like they would be saleable. They're these smaller masonite boards or smaller boards. And yeah, I'm going to dress over all of them. And I'm kind of excited to do something different on them. I mean, I have tons of canvas and board and things I can use. Like, I have stuff ready that I'm like, oh man, like I would love to get in here and start painting some stuff. I don't know why it's exciting to paint over those. Because usually when I have a body of work or an exhibition, they're all for sale and then they get sold piece by piece eventually. But these, without that context of the artist statement, just don't mean as much. They just really don't. Like, so the Charles Manson one I feel like can stand on its own without having any context. And the Nicki Minaj portrait looks just like a portrait. I mean, without the title and stuff, like, and the title, you know, drawing back to the artist statement, like, it'd be really difficult to understand any meaning. It could just be like, oh, someone just wants a portrait of Nicki Minaj. Like, sure, maybe, but I, for some reason, doubt that too, because it's not like an amazing painting of her. So I don't know, my quick thought is just this, going back to this notion of what's saleable and what's not. Because I had this painting, I talked about it on my personal vlog about how I did this self-portrait, and I really struggled with, man, this is not going to be saleable. Like, I just kind of went wild with it. It was very different from something that I've ever done before, and that was okay, and I really enjoyed the process, but immediately I started thinking, no, like, what am I going to do with this huge canvas? Like, what am I going to do? Like, no one's going to buy this thing, and like, and I just decided to leave it the way it was instead of trying to make it more commercially viable, and someone bought it within a couple days of me posting it. And I was like, oh wow, like, okay, it gave me confidence in the fact that, like, oh, I can do what I want and it will reach the right person. And I've got pieces that are years and years old that have not reached the right person yet. Maybe they never will. However, it's just a matter of positioning them in the right place too. So, I mean, in that context where I was like, oh, I made this for me and I made it the way I wanted to, but I still was thinking about it being saleable. And I felt like, no, I should just do what I want to do. I just need to create what I want to create. I'll put it out there, and if someone gets it, they get it. And if they don't right now, then maybe someone else will later. These are a little different. And I still want to talk, again, because I'm not keeping them because they're not going to be saleable, so I can just recycle them. I'm not upset about it. I accomplished what I wanted to with the exhibition. I don't know how many people it reached, you know, and how many people read the artist statement or kind of got what I was talking about. I know at least one person actually did some research based off of, you know, what happened here and some of the factual things that are actual events that happened. And Frank Olson, you know, being a victim of MK Ultra, which is not like a conspiracy theory, it's a real factual thing that happened that is, you know, U.S. government conspiracy against its own people. But anyway, someone, you know, talked to me on Instagram about it, like, wow, I actually looked into this, and this is messed up, like, I didn't know this was happening or whatever, and it's well documented. And I did a lot of research with this one, and it was not a personal exhibition. I just feel like I got what I wanted to out of it. I could have executed it better visually and technically, but that's not the way it worked out, and I'm still okay with it. So I don't know why I'm so excited to paint over them and do something else, because I have no idea what I'm going to do over top of them. But for some reason, it's like I cleansed that thing, that idea that I had for a long time. It was kind of fun, like the idea, and I got it out of my system. And, you know, I'm just keeping one piece as a remnant of that exhibition because I think without context, it is still visually appealing. It's aesthetic. It's the one that I, you know, feel I did the best on skillfully. And yeah, I think it is the most saleable, and the rest not so much. And again, because context too. Like, some of them I really enjoy their aesthetic, their aesthetics, I guess. And they're just not, yeah, I'm still figuring out how to deal with my own concept of like, oh, this is saleable and this isn't saleable, so what do I do with it? Do I feel bad? Did I waste my time? Did I waste supplies? This I feel really okay with. I don't know, that's just a thought that I had today because I picked the pieces up yesterday from the record store and none of them sold while they were up. They were all for sale, but none of them sold, and I just had to be okay with that, and I am okay with that. Now, moving on. The topic of appropriation. This is one of those ones where I could have done a little more research and came to the table with, you know, a little more than I've got, but I didn't, so look forward to that mess. I kind of approached the subject before when I talked about stealing art and talked about Richard Prince, and I don't want to go back into all the same examples or anything like that. And I didn't rewatch or re-listen to that episode for me to try and steer clear of some things. I didn't want that episode to influence how I was feeling about the topic today, and it's not exactly the same topic anyway. But it's been on my mind a little bit, appropriation. It's something that I think we see every day, or we see stolen art every day too, and I'm thinking like of just how to differentiate those two things. Sometimes there's an easy way to do that, and sometimes there's not, and it's kind of hard to tell. Like, I think it's really personal too. It's like, if I feel something has been appropriated in a way that I can appreciate and respect versus something like, oh, I just changed the terminology and call it stolen because it was done in a poor way. When really it's like, oh, you could appropriate something poorly and it could just still be appropriation without being theft, or you could steal something and do it well. But we kind of use different terms a lot of the times, even though maybe the same thing is happening, because one term seems to be a little softer than the other, or more acceptable. And so I wanted to talk about it today. I probably will use the Richard Prince thing as an example really quickly, but the main thing is Calvin and Hobbes. I wanted to talk about Calvin and Hobbes a little bit. I really enjoy Calvin and Hobbes. I enjoy the strip that Bill Watterson did years ago that he hasn't done for quite some time now. But they were just like comics that I kind of grew up with. They had the book collections in the house where I was getting babysat at, and I looked through them there. I enjoyed it visually. I loved I just loved everything that it was about because it worked on so many different layers of this philosophical thing going on and talking about life and kids getting into trouble and the imagination. I don't know. I just really loved it. I still love it. I have the complete series at home. But I loved it so much. I mean, I was curious about the creator, and I wanted to find a biography or something on Bill Watterson, and those are few and far between. And I remember I found one and I bought it, and it was, I think, In Search of Calvin and Hobbes, I think is what it was called. And it had to do with this person who wanted to write this biography on Bill Watterson, and he wasn't able to access Bill Watterson. He refused to be interviewed, to be found in any capacity. He just kind of really did not want to be in the spotlight ever for a long time. And then when people tried to contact him, through publicists or what have you for interviews or to ask questions for this book, biography, he just wouldn't allow that to happen. He did not accept any invitation to be interviewed or anything. But along with that, he only licensed one product ever. And from my memory, because this is one of those things I could have researched, but from my memory it was a calendar. And it was quite some time ago. So any other Calvin and Hobbes product that you can buy is stolen, is not licensed, is illegal, it's infringing upon copyright, because it is not, unless something's changed in the past couple of years, since the book came out. Maybe it's been more than a couple years since it came out, but I haven't heard of anything. And again, this is an area where I actually could have done some more research, but hey, I didn't. But at the time, there's been tons and tons of things, whether it be like the decal, like the Calvin, like decal that's urinating on something, which is usually, I've only ever seen it be really two things the majority of the time. That's either a different vehicle brand, because it's like, a Ford truck has a decal of Calvin urinating on a Chevy symbol, or vice versa, or whatever. And then since moving to Southern Alberta, I've seen it get involved in politics a lot, with him urinating on political parties and their logos, and I've never seen that before coming to Alberta. So that's interesting. But those decals I think people see a lot. But there's things all the time, like anywhere, that I see Calvin and Hobbes products, and it's just like, how? Like, either they're not, I don't really remember Bill's philosophy on having people chase the copyright, because what are you going to do with these small companies sometimes? You're not going to be able to get money out of them for infringing upon the copyright, and it would cost you so much just to chase it down legally. But he really wanted to preserve Calvin and Hobbes for what it was. It is beautiful, children's comic that, I shouldn't say children's comic, because I still get a lot out of it as an adult, but this beautiful universe and story and world with these characters that preserves a kind of innocence. He didn't want to taint that with him licensing his own products. Like, he could have made millions and millions and millions of dollars by creating products for consumption, but he didn't want to do that. He just felt like it wasn't something that he could do with integrity and keep the comic innocent and whatever else. And I think there is a way that you could do that, just depending on who you are and your values and stuff, but he felt like he couldn't, so he didn't. But other people do it anyway, so you'd think you'd want to chase the copyright on those and have those people stop creating those things, and it never does. There's bootleg things all over the world, but it's not like Calvin and Hobbes that I can't compare it to other things that I see. There's bootleg Nike t-shirts, or people just take a logo and then screen print it right in front of you at a flea market and then give it to you there for $20 or whatever, rather than you having to go and buy a Nike t-shirt for $40 or something. To me, that's a little different, because this is way more systematic and not on an individual level. People are getting these decals from Canadian Tire sometimes, and it's like, how do you sell a product that's illegal? How do you do that and be this huge company? And It's just weird. Anyway, that's a long intro for me to get into the fact that I wanted to talk about appropriation, because it just reminded me, because I was thinking of like, oh man, this is like a stolen, the likeness, the characters, whatever, you're putting them in new context, but you're selling it. It's just a product. It's not trying to make art out of it. But if you did use those characters in an artistic sense, instead of them being just stolen for profit, even if the piece was saleable, it could just be appropriation. And I started thinking about that, because again, it all comes down to like a person's personal feelings about it, but I don't think there's any way you can get around the fact that artists appropriate things. Some of it, well, I mean, I don't know if it'd have to be conscious or subconscious. We could talk about that too. I'm going to read a definition of appropriation, which I should have done at the very beginning. But Merriam-Webster, the definition I'm choosing from them is to take or make use of without authority or right, which to me is pretty much the same thing as stealing, is that you don't have the right to use that thing. It could be like, I think that's a really soft way to say steal, because that's like saying, I took someone's song and I used it without their acknowledgement or their permission, and I'm using it for my own purposes, and maybe my purposes have nothing to do with making money at all, but still I can't. Like, that's a YouTube thing, right? Like, I can't use music that is from someone else unless I have their strict permission to do so. I mean, like, I had to find original music that a friend of mine had made. I asked him, hey, can I kind of cut this up and use it as the intro and the outro for the podcast, for the YouTube videos and everything? He was like, yeah, go ahead. I credit him in there, and that's all I have to do. Whereas YouTube will scan, basically while it's uploading to see if there's a song that is, in whatever music groups that they have affiliated, and if it recognizes it, then it's like, hey, this is a copyright strike, you can't use that unless you can somehow provide permission that you're able to, but no, you're not allowed to. Anyway, happens with Instagram too, where, you can go live and it will shut down your live streaming on Facebook or Instagram if it recognizes the song that you were playing in the background. Because I like to paint live sometimes, that happens. And that, to me, like, when I think of appropriation, I'm not thinking of like just using something. It's always creating something with that thing, right? Remix culture, But if I look up, like I said, that's how appropriate, comes out in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, is to make use of something without permission. Or what was it exactly again? To take or make use of without authority or right. I mean, make use of, that's like me saying I'm going to steal a car and I'm going to make use of it by driving myself somewhere. But it kind of hints at the fact that you could be using this thing to create something new. So appropriation on Wiki gives us appropriation in art is the use of pre-existing objects or images with little or no transformation applied to them. The use of appropriation has played a significant role in the history of the arts. Yes, it has. So, as we have talked about before with trying to define things, like when we're trying to define graffiti, it gets really difficult. And I find that it gets difficult with art more than it does with almost anything else that I can think of as a subject, because it's like, hey, you know what a home run is? A home run means it isn't in the park anymore. Like, it's gone. It's into the crowd. It's past a barrier of a wall. That's how we define a home run. Oh, what's a hat trick? Okay, it's the same person that scores 3 goals in the same game. Okay, like, there's a lot of things that have a set definition. You can't change that definition. But when it comes to art, a lot of it is context. A lot of it is like, oh, the way that, this group of people around me have been talking about appropriation, that's kind of informed how I use that word and how I understand that word and how I understand the concept of appropriating altogether. Because we talk about borrowing, or some cultures, of people or schools or something might talk about stealing, and it's wrong. And I don't think you can get away from appropriating when it comes to art. But it all depends on intention and purpose and how you do it as well. And also who's looking at it and how do they feel about it. I don't feel any kind of way about it that is negative. But that's because my definition of appropriation involves creating something new. So this discussion that we had in digital imagery class, when I was kind of like going and doing some Photoshop stuff in university, and picked up some skills there, but that was one thing we talked about, was appropriating and talking about how there's a lot of rules that people have made. Like, well, if you change like 70% of the image, or you have to change at least 50% of it, and you can use it and it's legal. And then it's like, well, you can't prove in a court of law what if it's 49% or 51% that you changed, right? So it's just a feeling. And I mean, none of this, that argument really stands up, I think, in like a percentage aspect, but it was just a rule that you could use to say, yeah, if I'm gonna take this image off the internet and it's not my image, and I'm gonna alter it, I need to alter it a certain amount for me to feel good about the fact that I made something unique here. And so we did some collages where we took stuff from the internet and tried to make it our own and give it like a theme and a feel and whatever. And those images, like, I didn't take the photographs for those images, but I altered them and changed them and made it something else. I made it something original enough that I could give it a title and maybe call it art. Even though I didn't, make any of those images with my own hand, I just took what someone else had made and changed them. So I think remix culture, or just remix in general, could be really mixed into this conversation with appropriation. I think, to touch on the Richard Prince thing for a second, and I encourage you to just go and listen and or watch that episode that talks about like stealing art, because we talk about it a bunch there, is that taking an image and just blowing it up and changing the context of it, I would say, I mean, to me it still falls under appropriation, but that's because I liked the fact that it happened. I think he was creating a new context that started a new conversation that, yes, he made a lot of money off of, but I think there was sincerely something artistic and creative happening, and a lot of people do not feel that way. But I felt it was cheeky. I felt that, he took these images, he blew them up, he had the money, the capital to begin with in order to do something like that, and then change the context, change the message, for people to ask questions like, why is this art? I think that's really important. Whereas to take the likeness of Calvin, which isn't even necessarily an exact copy sometimes, but is take his likeness that's familiar as a character to a lot of people and make him urinate on something. It's specifically a product. Like, you're changing the context, you're changing the meaning, you're creating a new meaning, but I just don't respect that meaning. And it's not because he's urinating on something I actually really like and enjoy and agree with. Like, no. It's the fact that you would just do that at all upsets me and annoys me because it's purely for profit. Whereas if I talk about the Richard Prince thing, I'm like, I don't think that is purely for profit. I think there's something else going on here and there's more layers to it. Whereas, Calvin peeing on a NDP sign is like, okay, cool. You just wanted us to know that you don't like the NDP. Cool story. Like, I think that you could use any symbol for that. You don't need to use Calvin, and you get the exact same message across. Because most people aren't thinking about what Calvin actually stands for, and like Calvin as a character is not significant at all in that appropriation. It's just a recognizable figure, but not because of the symbol that and the weight that Calvin could carry with any theme or anything like that. People that are using those decals or making them aren't thinking about that at all. It's just like, oh yeah, it happened. Someone did it once and it sold, so we're just going to keep doing it. Anyway, I think that, like I said, artists appropriate all the time. It just depends on how you define it. Because I wouldn't even call it art, but with digital imagery skills, I've made a whole bunch of posters for my own purposes, like for that MK Ultra exhibition I was talking about. The poster has no original images by me. It's just the composition, the colors, the shifting of layers and transparencies and opacity. Like, I altered everything on there to make it its own thing, but I took images of butterflies, I took images of people dropping acid, I typed the text. It was someone else's font that I used, right? I changed colors, I played with things, I warped the images, and I made a unique poster that I don't think anyone else has ever made, just because, I had so many different elements going on in there that were created with a specific purpose and intention that I felt it got across. But I don't think anyone else has used all those elements in exactly the same way that I did. Picking all those images, whatever. So I created a unique product that doesn't necessarily make it art, but it was advertising art, and it expressed what I wanted it to express, and I don't feel bad about it. even painting someone's likeness in some aspect could be called appropriating. I don't think that's what we think of a lot of the time, but taking someone's likeness and just painting a portrait, sometimes as soon as a celebrity dies, just like boom, like that, it happens. And then people sell those pieces pretty quick. But a lot of artists do it. And I mean, I would call them middle of the road artists. Like, I feel like I'm on the bottom rung of artists. And then there's like the really, really famous people that tend not to do that because they're working on their own stuff. And maybe they're doing, every once in a while I see one that like a really, A-list artist that will do like a tribute piece. Sometimes people are doing these tribute pieces on walls though, they're not for sale. But a lot of the time these middle of the road artists that have a certain amount of thousands of followers will be like, oh, David Bowie died, I'm going to create this David Bowie portrait, I love David Bowie, and then yes, it sells immediately, and it's a good portrait too. But I mean, you're using someone's likeness, whether or not you're sincerely paying tribute or not. Again, intention and purpose matter, but at the end of the day, you're selling it as a product. I've created a portrait of Marilyn Manson and enjoyed doing it, and yes, I had it for sale, and yes, it sold, and I thought that was great. It wasn't like a super personal piece. It wasn't a tribute to someone who was dead. Like, again, intention and purpose matter only so much anyway. And I don't necessarily think that creating art with the intention to sell is a negative or evil thing. Not at all. But yeah, even someone's likeness could be seen as appropriation. I need to go back to that definition that Wiki had here for a second. Use of pre-existing objects or images with little, no, or transformation applied to them. So again, that doesn't ring true to how I feel about appropriation. If appropriation is being defined as like a positive thing or just twisted that way or whatever, it's using something and then adding on to it, subtracting from it, changing the context of it. It's not that there's little or no use of transformation. I think you are still appropriating something even if almost none of it's recognizable anymore. You used it as a guide. You could have like a portrait or something, right? And it could be a collage or like a photograph of someone that you put on canvas and then you paint all around it and you do this other thing and half of it's gone and you can't even see it. But I've taken someone else's product, whether it be art or not, I've taken someone else's product and I have altered it from my own means. And sometimes that's just a textural thing. Sometimes no one will ever see it. And I guess then I kind of go against what I said. It's not, is it appropriation then? I mean, if I take a picture off the wall and I put it on a canvas and I paint over it, and I just wanted the picture there for texture, so I could paint over paper or a magazine instead of painting over canvas for a second, I don't think that would be appropriation because there's no intention in that appropriation. So I think appropriation in itself needs to have intention. This is why the thing with Richard Prince works, because they're very intentional on what he did. And this is why the thing with Calvin doesn't work. There's no purpose or intention on having Calvin there except for the fact that it's recognizable, but they're not doing it with any real acknowledgement or understanding or care for what Calvin stands for. So that intention and purpose right there, we could create a definition of what's being stolen and what's just being appropriated or remixed. And with that word again, remix culture, I think that's really important. I think it does push new art. So many people talk about how there's no original ideas anymore, there's nothing unique, blah, 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 blah. Every art movement is bounced off of another art movement, and now we're seeing just images bounce off images. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. There's so much oversaturation, there's so much more things we see that we have access to on a daily basis. I think that we make the best of that and can, be influenced by it and be inspired by it, and sometimes we can directly use those images to create something new. Sometimes it becomes really convoluted and boring and dull, and other times it doesn't. We can do something exciting. That's like saying that I was inspired by a book, and there's been a lot of people inspired by that book. Or even go back even further to an text. I mean, think about the Bible. How many people have, done a portrait of Adam and Eve for whatever reason, or the Garden of Eden, or something they're trying to express. And no, you're appropriating a character in a book for a purpose. You're trying to tell your own story with someone else's story. It's been going on for how long I can't even say. But you're trying to tell your own story versus someone else's story. Or you're trying to tell their story through your filter. right? And someone might connect with that, and it could be the exact same message you're trying to send. You're not just using those characters in a new context, right? But there's this whole thing. Like I took a class which was being offered. It was the first year that the class was being offered. It was called the Future and History of the Book, and it was really interesting. And we talked about remix culture in there. I don't remember why, but we did. And I remember that's when I was introduced to DJ Danger Mouse's Grey album, or I was introduced to Girl Talk, which is a little too ADD for me because it changes so quickly within seconds sometimes. But the DJ Danger Mouse, great album. I mean, it combines all of the beats, all of the music, instruments from the Beatles' White Album, and then he goes to Jay-Z's Black Album, and all the vocals basically of Jay-Z's, all the songs are Jay-Z's lyrically, and like I said, the vocals. And he takes some samples of vocals from the Beatles from that White Album every once in a while too, he uses them as an instrument, and then he has these songs, and he created a unique product. He didn't create either thing originally, never had to put down his own beat for anything. He just remixed it in a way to create a new product. And I had no problem with that. But obviously those things were copyrighted, so they get into this whole legal aspect of it. And it's just like, man, this person is creating something new, and yeah, you could have, let's say he sold it, let's say he was able to sell it in stores and stuff, and he, made money off it. I just don't see an issue with that. You created a brand new product. You created something amazing with your original and unique perspective. You combined two things and mashed them up. And if someone wanted to pay for it, they should be allowed to. And that person should be able to profit from that, because I just don't see why not. I don't know, I think I'm fairly loose when it comes to the topic of stealing art or appropriating it or whatever. I think that, again, appropriation and remix culture to me kind of go hand in hand. Stealing is something else, but that's just kind of depending on how you want to view it. To me, the stealing thing is just, that is more of what, you don't change or alter anything, you just stole an image and then you call it yours. It's different if you steal an image and you acknowledge it, and I don't mean like sourcing it necessarily or acknowledging it very formally, but you are aware and you're not trying to convince someone else otherwise, that it's not yours, but you're putting it in the context that somehow creates something new. I think that's the key thing. You're trying to create something new, even with someone else's work. You're creating a new conversation. You're expressing something different. That's what's most important. I feel like I could have said that in 5 minutes rather than 25 minutes or however long it's been. But I'm curious as to other people's thoughts on appropriation, and if anyone else has heard these rules and stuff when it comes to like, oh well, if you change 50% of it, then it's okay. I mean, that was discussion, like I said, we had in this digital imagery class, and it's something that I think about every once in a while when I'm creating like a poster for a band or a logo or something. Not so much the logos, but I mean like if I'm creating like a show poster, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I've never charged anyone for a show poster. I just like, what do you want? Who's playing that night? What time and the date? Give me the information, and then based on the bands that are playing, and maybe if it's a festival or that has a title or something, then I will run with a theme, and I just take images off the internet. I'm not really creating anything original from my own hand, other than digitally altering stuff that I've taken that images are already out there. Now, to bring it back to a more personal place, if someone altered one of my images and then they got success from that, that'd be interesting. Just going back to the Richard Prince thing too, if he stole one of my pictures and made tens of thousands of dollars off it, just by blowing it up, reprinting it basically, or just printing it for the first time, making an edition of it, and then just like maybe changing a line or adding context to it, I'd be like, man, are people buying the concept or are they buying the image? Because if they're buying the image, they could have just bought my original image, right? But then again, his image is different than mine. If he blew it up into a print rather than like this is an original canvas or whatever, I think that it would be a tough pill to swallow. But I mean, at the end of the day, as long as that concept is strong, I have a really hard time being mad at it. I really do. I really believe concept is king, and that when you're appropriating with stuff, I don't know, everyone's got different rules, but it's a very personal thing. And I think if you don't find anyone that is willing to buy that product, I mean, then no one's willing to buy it. And some people are very ignorant to where it came from. So again, it's intention and purpose. If you are intentionally trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes and sell something that is not yours, because I mean that happens all the time. People lift logos and make it a different color and then give it like the company, name underneath it, and that's it. It's like, no, you stole that logo from so and so's company, and like that's not cool at all. Like not even at all. That's not a remix. That's not appropriating. That's just stealing. And yes, you altered it for this other company, but there's something rotten about that. And if you have the intention and purpose of not acknowledging or not creating something new with that image and trying to make an easy buck, I'm not down for that at all. Not at all. But yeah, the Richard Prince thing, I was just going to listen to that episode about stealing art and Richard Prince, and talking about some local examples too of people who just like took an image and are trying to sell an image that they didn't take, and not having the permission to do that. I don't know. It's interesting. Again, it needs to be somewhat authentic in your intention and purpose, and you need to acknowledge the source in the context somehow, that you were altering that, and the alteration of the original intent is creating a new intent. And again, to go back to the Calvin thing, you don't acknowledge the original intent. You change the context, and again, for a certain purpose, to sell a product, to express you don't like this thing, but the original symbol, you're not using it for any purpose whatsoever. It doesn't mean anything. I think I've rambled enough about appropriation today. So with that, I'm going to get to the epilogue. So as I mentioned during the quick thoughts, that the epilogue and the quick thoughts were not really going to align with the essay and the bulk of the message today, or the thing I wanted to have a conversation about. And it's more just a rant about, well, yesterday was Family Day, and there's some activities at different places in the city. There's like the Nature Center had some stuff going on, and just activities for kids that were free, just to get people out and an opportunity to experience that space. And one of the local galleries here, like a big gallery, was offering some activities, for kids to come and do stuff for free and experience art in the gallery. And I have talked before about the responsibility of artists, and how I feel like we shouldn't have any. Obviously, I'm a huge hypocrite and have all the double standards in the world, but I was just kind of disappointed when we went there as to what activities they had for kids, because I still do have a different definition of art and craft. I don't believe they're exactly the same thing. I think that you can use traditional crafting, if you want to call that, materials to create art, like fine art, capital A art, whatever you want to call it. The materials to me don't mean anything. Again, it's the concept that matters, and what you're doing with your materials that matters. Because you could use oil paint to create nothing. Like, it could basically be a craft. Like, it's purely, maybe decorative isn't even the right word, because some of that can be art. I don't want to get back into that definition or that conversation or argument with myself right now. But there was very little that was offered, and to me, again, everyone brings their own thing to it. I just think that maybe sometimes what we provide for children isn't pushing them in the way to question what art is, or to challenge them, or to expose them to new ideas. It's like, hey, here's some paper and some pencil crayons, this is art. Or here's a cardboard box and some paint, do whatever you want, choice is yours. Like, yeah, we give them the time and the space and the freedom and materials to create what they want. So if they're already in a place where they are, they're just having fun with materials. But I think that from an early age, we can expose children to ideas of what art is and what art isn't, and therefore create more artistic and informed and educated individuals later, giving them more opportunities to experience different concepts. I don't know. I just felt like it was really, I don't know, for me, it was a letdown, just because I was like, oh, I brought this child to this event, and yes, they enjoyed themselves, and that was the point. But from the gallery, I was like, wow, we made buttons. And by make buttons, I mean, either you colored on a piece of paper and gave it to someone, and they just like used like the button maker and did it all and gave it back to you. Like, oh, that's really cool. Like, that's a nice thing. Or sometimes they just gave them like a piece of paper that they didn't even do anything with, and they just did it. And it's like, this kid didn't create anything. It just curated. Like, they chose like, here, I like this piece of paper with this pattern. Make a button for me. I don't know. I felt like there was more opportunity there. Like, you could have had workshops. You could have had, there was like a drumming thing that happened at one point, I guess, that we missed out on, and there was what they called a instrument petting zoo. I thought that was a really cool opportunity to be like, hey, you ever thought about playing an instrument? Well, here's a bunch of different ones, and here's what you can do with them. This is what it's like. Here's someone to like show you and teach you a little bit about it. Like, I thought that was a cool concept to get people exposed to instruments. And I don't know why we couldn't have done that with the visual art stuff as well, because the only visual art stuff that was available was, here's a bunch of cardboard boxes and here's some paint, or here's some paper and there's pastels, pencil, crayons, and markers, and you can just draw. And if you want, we can turn it into a button. I just felt like it should have been a lot more engaging and challenging. You're an art gallery that has some serious art in there, and I feel like that isn't just for adults. Like, I feel like we can expose children in a accessible way to these different ideas. Anyway, that's what I wanted to finish up on, because I think that's important. I was never, given that opportunity really to do that, and I didn't find out I liked art until after high school, because even in high school I wasn't challenged to think about what art is and what it's not and what it could be. It was just really dry, very basic, and it was not at all an opportunity for me to explore and create. It was just do this thing that everyone else does. Okay, we'll call it a day. We'll do a still life every day, and that's what art is. We're just to draw objects from life. That was a lot of it. Anyway, yeah, I think it is somewhat a responsibility of artists, of galleries, of people who want to support art with the youth and children as well, to give them opportunities to have discussion, to be challenged, we could have had a documentary in one room. That wouldn't have been hard to set up. You could have had like discussion with an artist, and they could have had like their pieces all set up in there, and someone would be like, oh, I have questions, or they want to see what an exhibition is like that is more accessible, and you can have someone there to answer questions immediately instead of being intimidated by a huge artist statement or whatever else, right? Like, there's a lot of things I think that could have been done, and I'm just ranting about the fact that it wasn't, and it was just very like, here, make buttons, or here's a cardboard box to play with. I just didn't think that it advanced any child's art education, I guess, and I feel like that should have been an opportunity. Some of them could have just been like, it could have gone over kids' heads, even if the opportunity was there, and it could have just been having fun. And a lot of the education is fun, and they don't recognize it as learning, and that's fine. Very informal, casual learning is great and fantastic, but there's still learning happening, whereas go to town with some pencil and paper, I mean, they're only going to get learning. There's no opportunity for learning other than what they bring to themselves or with themselves to the table, and that's it. There's no opportunity of challenge with that other than the one that they have. Like, I'm going to really challenge myself today and draw this thing I've never wanted to, like, or I've wanted to draw forever. And like, I don't think that's really what's going to happen in that scenario. So I felt it was a little careless, and you could have used the opportunity a lot better. And I, for the first time, really started thinking about art education for children, because I teach at the high school level, and that's kind of where I want to stay. And now I'm realizing, like, oh, we could start this a little earlier. I mean, I've thought about that before too, but I didn't really think about how could you do that? How could you start art education earlier in a way that was authentic and accessible? And I think, like, just really quickly yesterday with what I saw, I was like, man, you could do this so much better. And I started thinking of ideas. That's my little rant. Anyway, art for everyone all the time. That's my artist life this week.